aware of. This Thursday, we have a kids event. We're going to be playing Mission Impossible in here. I kid you not, we did this with the teenagers this last week. My iPhone told me I ran roughly 8.5 kilometers during that event. So kids, they're all in Sunday school now. I don't even have to talk to parents. If you want to get your kids to run off some energy, ages 5 to 11, Thursday evening we're going to be doing Mission Impossible in here. So it's going to be a good time. All right. If you got a Bible with you, you can open it up to the book of Matthew, chapter 5. We're going to be continuing our series, Sermon on the Mountain. As of right now, we're going through what we call the Beatitudes or the blessings. And as a way of recap, just so we're kind of jumping into this with some contextual understanding, what's happening in verses 3 to 10 is what we call an inclusio. That meaning in verse 3, we see a statement in which Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And then in verse 10, we see again the same kind of statement. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And what that is Matthew is using a literary tool to say, hey, everything from here in verse 3 to here in verse 10 has to do with those who are receiving the kingdom of heaven. And so far we've looked at what that looks like. You enter the kingdom by being poor in spirit, recognizing that you come to Jesus and say, God, I've got nothing. I have nothing to offer you, but I just need to receive from you. And then last week we looked at mourning sin, which again, you look at that in its context. I think that's what that text means. We say, when you recognize that reality that you are spiritually poor, you turn and you mourn that, and God will in turn comfort you. All right? This morning we jump into verse 5, and it says this: "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." So here's where we're going to start this morning, is with this question. What does the word meek even mean? Right? Like, what does that word even mean? Oftentimes I think we have this idea in our heads that the word meek means essentially weak. It means submissive. It means easily imposed upon, right? And we'll even come up with sayings to kind of push into that meaning, right? Like, that person is meek as a mouse, which is a terrible saying, by the way, because mice are not meek. They're little terrors. They're terrible. They take over everything. If you've had any experience with mice, you know that's true. So check it out. A couple weeks ago, proved mice are meek. A couple weeks ago, I came back from a hunting trip. I had just put in about 30 kilometers on horseback, hopped off at our truck, and me and my hunting partner were both sore and tired. We're just going to sleep in the truck tonight. So we are taking care of the horses. We're making sure they're okay. We get into the truck. I got my headlamp on. It's dark already. And I turn my head and I look as this little freak crawls up out from underneath the dash, and it looks right at us with the headlights. I don't know if you've seen the movie Captain Phillips. You've probably seen the meme on the internet. It's like, look at me, I'm the captain now, right? That's what this mouse was like, right? It was not meek at all. And so we killed it. And by we, I mean my hunting partner did. He kicked it, and I screamed like a little girl because he kicked it in my direction. I had Crocs on, and nobody's got time for that kind of trauma, right? So that saying is bad, right? Like, meek as a mouse doesn't track with me, but yet we kind of get what the idea is, right? Like, there's this mentality that we have that being meek means that you are of small composure. Now, you go to Google and you translate it. You type in the word meek, you're going to get quiet, gentle, easily imposed on, submissive, right? And so I'm not saying that the internet would ever be wrong. I don't want you to think that. But I think that maybe what happens is we've got a case where translating from one language to another is shown to not be an exact science, right? So listen to me. Translating languages is an art. It takes some form of kind of being able to work things through. And so to go from Greek into English, or Greek into French, or Greek into Spanish, it's not always going to be necessarily perfect. Now, I want to back that up for a minute and talk about this, because there's kind of this idea out there that people will jump on that and they'll push that to the extreme, like translating languages is difficult and so we shouldn't trust the scriptures, or translating languages is difficult so we should only read this version over here. So track with me for a minute. as someone who, I'm not a Greek scholar, like I'll put my cards on the table there, but as somebody who has studied the scriptures, as somebody who has studied languages to some extent, I would say this. Most of the modern translations that we have, where we're translating Hebrew and Greek, and by translating, I mean we are working from those original languages. You've got a team of scholars who are working to translate that into English. Most of the modern translations that we have are worth reading, right? Like this idea that you got to have one or the other, it just, to me, from what I've seen in my study of languages, that just doesn't track. Right? Like we've got a lot of decent translations, and the beauty is that because we have a lot of different ones, you can actually, if you don't speak Greek, if you don't speak Hebrew, you can work with multiple different English translations and go, okay, here are some of the discrepancies. And then, man, if you're that interested in it, we have numerous tools that you can go to and work through some of the language stuff. Like pick up a decent commentary, get somebody who knows languages, and they can help you walk through some of the translating things that are going on there. But I say that to kind of encourage you in this. Like, I just think most of the translations we have are worth reading. I will say this, and then I'll maybe run and hide. I don't think that your modern paraphrases, as well-intentioned as they are, should be your daily reader. Okay, I'll leave that there. Translating the scriptures is an art, not a science. So we've got to understand, okay, what does this word meek mean? Well, in Greek, the word meek is praus, and it comes from praus, which means mild or gentle. D.A. Carson, who you'll hear me quote a lot over the course of this sermon series as we go through Matthew, says this: it can signify the absence of pretension. That's hard for some of us, right? But generally suggest gentleness and the self-control that it entails. Okay, so let me again just be honest with you for a minute. I got some ginger twinge in my hair, right? I don't know if any of you've noticed. Gentleness and self-control do not generally track with that, right? Like I'm almost genetically predisposed to not be that way. It's just the way it is, right? And for those of you who are like, are you really trying to blame your hair color on not being meek? I'm a millennial. We blame everything but ourselves for everything. It's what we do, right? But, okay, jokes aside, man, I have a tendency to be an intense personality. I have a tendency to be a cut-to-the-quick kind of guy, and at times, that doesn't lend itself to being a meek person, to being a gentle and self-controlled type of person. And the reality is, I think many of us in our culture oftentimes have trouble leaning into being gentle and to being self-controlled. Right? We've got a message of get what you want, care about yourself, make sure that your rights are met. That's not a Christian type of ethic. That's not a Christ-centered, Jesus-taught type of ethic. Rather, Jesus says, blessed are the gentle who know what it looks like to walk with self-control. I remember in college, and I'm pretty sure I've shared this before, but it's worth repeating. I remember in college, we went through the Sermon on the Mount, and one of the professors covered blessed are the meek, and he said the word that he used kind of pictures that, the image of a war horse. You have incredible strength, but it's under restraint. So you have power under restraint. And that's had an incredible impact on my life, because what does it mean? It means that I don't always have to assert my rights and get what I deserve. It means that at times I can step back and go, okay, I'm just going to walk away from it. I'm just going to allow this to happen. Right? And the best example of that is who? The Sunday school answer, Jesus. And Jesus has all the power in the world. You look at his ministry, you look at his life. How often do you think he must have been like, I could call legions of angels and just end this right now? And yet he chose not to. Right? Like we get an example of that in Matthew chapter 26. People come to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out his sword and he cuts off the ear of the high priest. And Jesus is like, whoa, we'll pump the brakes here for a minute. If I wanted to, I could call thousands of angels right here, right now. It'd be over. And yet he chose not to assert his rights, and he chose to lay his life literally down. Now, I know what we could say about this. We go, okay, that's cool. Jesus laid his life down. But when you read the scriptures, there are also times where we see where Jesus is pretty legit angry at things, right? Like, what about Jesus flipping the tables in the temple, right? What about Jesus looking at the religious leaders and calling them painted caskets with dead men's bones inside? That's my paraphrase, right? What about that kind of thing? I'd say this. There are absolutely times where it is appropriate for us to have some level of anger or some level of intensity. But track with me for a minute. First and foremost, that is not an uncontrolled anger, right? There is a difference between a raging, out of control anger and a controlled, self-controlled anger. I was sharing with some of our guys this morning, this past week, I made the huge mistake of buying the new NHL video game. And you go online, you play online, and man, I could show you what uncontrolled rage looks like, right? For those of you who are gamers, you know what it's all about, right? The rage quit, you're like, why is this happening to me? Jesus didn't demonstrate that kind of anger. Rather, when Jesus was angry, he was under control, and he was generally angry about things that were incredibly offensive to what people who should have known better should have been doing towards God. So I think what we see is that while it is okay at times to be upset about situations, while it's okay to even voice that or to act appropriately, our mode of operation, our default going into situations is gentle and self-controlled. And the great thing about that is, listen, when you come back to Jesus as our example for that, yeah, you've got an example. But you've also got Jesus saying, hey, here's the good news. When I die and when I rise from the dead and go into heaven, I'm going to send you a helper. Believers also have the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God living inside of them, and that Spirit will work to transform you. So it's not just, hey, I got to try really hard to be gentle and to, figure this out and be self-controlled. No. As you focus on Jesus, as you pursue Jesus, his Spirit at work inside of you will be transforming you. So it's not just you trying really hard, it is God working his purposes, his salvation out inside of you. Now here's the fun part of this. Last week we talked about mourning sin. And so for some of you this morning, as you hear this talk about being gentle and self-controlled, you may need to join me in doing a little bit of self-assessment, going, God, I need to mourn the areas in my life where I have not been that. And I need your Spirit to transform me so that I would be that. And then the beautiful thing is as we do that, man, I believe God is faithful to work in us. And our lives will begin to look like they are marked with that word price, that idea of being gentle, that idea of being self-controlled in how you treat your family, and how you interact with your friends, and how you interact with your coworkers, and how you conduct yourself online when it's anonymous, right? In a time when people are quick to assert their rights, where people are quick to turn to internet rage, Jesus' church needs to be quick to lay down their lives for the good of many and for the sake of the gospel. And then what happens? Jesus says, blessed are the meek, they shall inherit the earth. Okay, so we've got to work a little bit here on our eschatological frameworks. And if you're like, man, that's a mouthful, you're right. It's a word you should be familiar, though. The word eschatos is the Greek word for last. So when we talk about eschatology, we're talking about the study of the last things. And the reason I say that we need to work on that is because I have observed there is a pop-level belief among many Christians that what happens is one day you're going to die, you're going to go to heaven or hell, and then one day in the future, God's going to clean house on the earth. Everybody will stand before God and be judged and either go to heaven or hell. Now, on some level, there's some accuracy in that, and on some level, I think there's some things missing. In that framework, man, I think the idea that the meek will inherit the earth is difficult to establish. Why? Because the earth doesn't end up playing any role in any kind of a future, man. We just die and we go either to heaven or hell, and the earth is going to burn or whatever God's going to do with it. I don't think that view is necessarily biblically accurate. All right, so track with me for a minute. I want to cautiously develop what I think is a more biblical view. Say this, cautiously, because when we talk about the last things, there are large chunks of scriptures that Christians engage with in regard to the future, in regard to Christ's return, that are clothed in what we call apocalyptic literature. Okay? So track with me, don't get lost here. Apocalyptic literature uses vivid and visionary imagery to convey generally historical events that are happening, have happened, or will happen. All right, so I'm going to give you an example of this. If you've got a Bible with you, turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 to 8 say this, and this is an example of apocalyptic imagery. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. After that, which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and what I saw, I was in Susa the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, there was a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. As I was considering this, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him with his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram, broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. There was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of the heavens. Okay, so if you read that, you stop there, you don't know history, good luck figuring out what in the world is going on there. Right, like there's a sheep, it's got these horns, one of them's longer than the other one. Then this goat shows up and it's got this super prominent horn and is beating up the sheep. And then 4 more horns show off after that first one breaks up. Are you kidding me? What in the world does that even mean? Yet, check this out. Historically, that's telling a story. All right? So track with me. The sheep is Persia and Media. Right? The Persian and the Median Empire was incredibly strong. But along comes the ram, which is the Greek Empire. There's a conspicuous horn. Alexander the Great pushes all the way to the borders of India in conquest, but then he dies at the height of his power, and 4 of his generals, the 4 horns, break up his empire. That vision, that apocalyptic imagery is so insanely accurate that scholars who are not Christians, who don't believe in the ability for God to tell the future, go, man, the book of Daniel couldn't have been written in 600 BC. It had to be written in 200 BC because there's no way he could predict the future that accurately. Right? And so what we see in this example is that apocalyptic imagery is actually interacting with history very reliably. So then the question becomes, well, what do we do with that? Well, I'd say that there's some principles that we need to apply. There seems to me to be a number of Christians who go to, especially the book of Revelation, you could go to the book of Isaiah as well, and they see the apocalyptic literature, and man, they just get stuck there. Like everything is about this apocalyptic literature in the book of Revelation, right? Like you'll see this. I promise you, maybe I shouldn't say this, but you know I'm going to anyways. Like I have heard that every Democratic president since Clinton is the beast of Revelation 13, right? Like people are like, this is it, here's the Antichrist. It's like, okay, can we just maybe pump the brakes a little bit and lean on the things we know for sure while holding the things that are a little bit more ambiguous with an open hand, right? And I say that because the other temptation is to look at things in the book of Revelation and look at apocalyptic literature and go, nah, I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. That's also an unhealthy reaction. We need to look at the things that are certain and hold to those. And when we come to things that are a little bit more ambiguous, study them, know them, but hold your interpretations with an open hand. So what are the things that we know for certain? The first is Jesus is coming back. Right? Like you cannot argue this when you look at the scriptures. Physically, suddenly, Jesus is coming back to claim his bride, the church. We also know there's going to be a final judgment. Everyone will give an answer for the lives that they lived. Specifically, did you trust Jesus and his righteousness applied to you, or didn't you? Third thing, Christ will reign over and with us in a new heavens and a new earth. And this brings us back to the meek will inherit the earth. So in the scriptures, when you hear that terminology, new heavens, new earth, it is used, again, we're going to use this word, eschatologically. It's talking about the end of times. You see it in Isaiah 65. You see it in the book of Revelation. But here's the thing. I think we have a tendency to hear the word new and think, okay, new, and this is not like how do I say this? This is a reasonable place to go. We hear new and we think categorically new, completely different, never been used before. But here's my pushback on that, okay? What does Christ make you and I? New? Is there still some continuity with the old? The answer to that's yes. Unless you're perfected now, even then I would say there's still content. You're still you, right? We see in our own lives that Christ's transformative work makes old things new, restores old things, redeems old things, brings about his purposes to make that which was originally intended come to life. So my suggestion to you is that when we see this idea of a new heavens and a new earth, that yes, it is new, and yet there's also continuity. Right, so track with me, go back a few weeks. One of the things that we said is you have another example of an inclusio running all the way from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation. In the book of Genesis, you see the tree of life. Man is removed from having access to the tree of life. Fast forward, you track through to the book of Revelation, what happens? In the new creation, man is again brought into access with the tree of life. God is restoring what he created to what it ought to be. And listen to me, there is a gospel reality in that for you and I, in which God is restoring us to what he wants us to be, what he created us to be. God is restoring his creation to what he intended it to be. So when Jesus says the meek will inherit the earth, he's making a claim in which he's saying, hey, listen, things aren't going to be this way forever. The kingdom is moving forward, and if you receive the kingdom, you will also receive an inheritance. It is this creation that I've made for you, redeemed, restored, created, made to be what it ought to be. And I think what happens so many times is we look at the trajectory of scriptures, and somehow we're like, man, I'm just going to escape this reality and go somewhere else. It's going to be super airy-fairy. Man, heaven and earth, the new creation, from what I could see in the scriptures, is more real than anything we experience. It's better than anything we experience. It's all of the good things that we know here and now, just jacked up and better. Right, so this idea that wanting to sit on a cloud and play a harp, and I'm going to do that for eternity, man, that's just bogus. Rather, I'm going to spend eternity knowing and enjoying God's good creation, knowing and enjoying him, myself being made new as well. All right, and then there's one more word that I want to quickly touch on here in this text, and that is inherit. The word inherit has certain connotations, right? And it actually has a lot of connotations, but there's a couple things I want to talk about really quickly. The first is that the way that you have an inheritance is if you are a son or a daughter. So track with me for a minute. If you are part of the kingdom, you are a son or a daughter of God. All right? Some of you need to hear that this morning. You belong to him. He looks at you and he says, he's mine, she's mine. He has a claim on your life. He loves you. He is going to bring you to salvation, to redemption, to completion. It's good news. The word inheritance also has another connotation, and that is a connotation of family. Why? Because we are inheriting the kingdom. Right, so one of the things that especially Western evangelicalism has done, and there's good aspects of this, but we have stressed your personal faith, right? You need to have a relationship with Jesus. You need to. And while all of that is true, the Christian faith has always been a communal faith. When you are rescued by Jesus, when you're saved by Jesus, you are not just individually saved, you are brought into a community of people who are rescued by Jesus. Right? And the idea that you can walk out Christianity by yourself with no Christian fellowship is absolutely, completely, and totally foreign to what the scriptures teach. The scriptures teach that, man, we need each other. You get the Apostle Paul, he uses all sorts of metaphors for this. One of the big ones is that we are a body. This idea of inheritance means, man, you are bought, you are brought in, you are adopted, you are a son and daughter, and you have brothers and sisters who you should be walking out your faith alongside of. And all of that, man, when we come back around, it is good news. And I would suggest you, and here's where we're going to bring this back to the idea of being meek, should probably put us in a mental spot where we're okay with knowing that we're not always going to be treated right in this life. We're okay knowing that there are going to be injustices in this life. We're okay with at times stepping back and going, you know what? This is terrible. I have been treated horribly, and yet my hope is not here and now. My hope is in the fact that Jesus reigns and will reign, and I will be made new, and I'm being made new. And so I can look at this with a perspective that says, I don't have to get everything I'm going to get here and now. And man, I believe that as you and I engage in living a life that believes that, how can the gospel not begin to move forward as people look at you and go, man, what's wrong with you? Why are you okay with being wronged sometimes? Why are you constantly the person who's like gentle and self-control? Like, what's the deal with that? Man, listen, my hope isn't here and now, and so I can live that way. And then here's where we come around to where I want us to land. Church, live that way. And like, not just because you're trying really hard, but because the Spirit of God is transforming you to be men and women who are gentle, who are self-controlled, who are passionate about making the good news of the kingdom of heaven known. Let's pray. God, we thank you, first and foremost, that you have given us the example of what it looks like to be meek, that you have been gentle with us, that you've been self-controlled with us. God, I pray, I deeply pray for my own life and for all of our lives that your Spirit would be birthing and growing that reality in our hearts and our minds and the way that we live. God, that we would go from gospel understanding, gospel encounter where we understand what you have done, and that would move to transformation. God, that as we are transformed, that would also move to mission. God, that we would be people who are taking the gospel into the world, that we would unashamedly be people who are making Jesus known. And God, I ask that you would give us favor in that. I ask that you would lead us in that, and we pray, Jesus, build your kingdom. We ask this all in Jesus' precious and holy name. Amen. Amen. I love you, church. Be blessed. We'll see you soon.